I'd love to open up the context a little bit wider and just looking at the wider world that we're living in. It's a huge war zone at the moment, and it's just so devastating to see what's happening across the world, and it is having a massive effect on everyone. We're in this huge melting pot. We're in a stage of development in humanity where there's progress in one area where we have AI and we've got the fifth revolution. Then we have actual revolutions and wars across the world as well, having huge impact and change on what the marketplace and reflecting back into the marketplace. This was also causing effect in how people are acting in their work environments, and the leaders really are under a huge amount of pressure to be able to calm things down and also to be able to bring people across the bridge to success. So we're here to support the leaders in understanding how they can lead with excellence and how they can really benefit from just changing and becoming aware of their own leadership style so that they can resource themselves in these times of change, and they actually can flourish when these and harness the opportunities that are also available at this time. So for us, we're looking at conflict, and when we look at the different leadership styles, we talk about dominant leader and the avoidant leader. They show up differently in conflict, don't they, Kim?
They do, incredibly different. And being probably a dominant leader in the past, Caroline, I've noticed how that is kind of no longer the way of actually leading. There is, decisions to be made as a dominant leader. However, it's bringing a bit more compassion. So compassionately making decisions, holding an authority. Whereas I suppose, for an avoidant leader, it's just, and I know you've kind of been in that positioning before in the past as well, is just understanding whether or not that's creating more disengagement. So if I was to show up with that style now, whereas I feel like it's an older style of leadership, that we can actually evolve a bit more or adapt a bit more or tweak a little bit more, just really kind of just look at adapting this, because in the past, I know in having those frameworks in place, that didn't necessarily create more engagement, because it was like this forceful nature. And I'm really noticing that and concerned, with the level of, pressures and struggles and conflict that's going on in the workplace, that the communication piece is kind of lagging. And so if we can understand our communication style, and that's why we kind of created the dominant leader or the avoidant leader, and which style are you adapting to in that moment? Because, it's really a case of what are you choosing? And what's the charge behind that in choosing that? Because there's something that we value about it.
So let's talk about what's actually happening in reality and the statistics around this. So we look at the World Economic Forum, we see that actually there's huge disengagement across the world globally when it comes to the innovation of culture in corporates. And this is actually being pinpointed down to the conflict resolution. So what is actually happening when it's being reported statistically that when there's this dominant leadership style, what happens with the people in the staff, which is this old style of leading, is that there's disengagement. So what happens within the individual is that they just shut down. So it's massively affecting innovation across the globe. And it is something that is, because it has three outcomes. One is that there's disengagement. The second one is they have a low retention of staff, and then the reputation of the corporations are affecting people wanting to work there. So when it comes to leadership style, we do need to create a new way of leading to be able to respond to the changing environment that we're leading through. So it is becoming aware of in the challenging situation, how do I show up? And then to resource ourselves when we are showing up like that. So what would you advise if you are noticing yourself showing up like that? What was one resource, Kim, that you could advise a leader in a hot spot to adapt?
So in a hot spot, it's really just knowing yourself and who you are. It doesn't take it away from who you are being a dominant leader, because we think that with force or forcefulness or this authoritarian piece that we're in power, but there's no such thing as that, because we're still holding our own power. But it's more about the commercial outcomes. What is it I need my team, or what is it I want to see and feel within my team? And so do I want that disengagement? So if you were showing up in that way, it's kind of just recognizing it. So I'd say that that's probably the most simple thing, to really just acknowledge that and just take accountability that you are actually being forceful, but then noticing that it requires a two-way agreement. It requires some sort of understanding as to how the other person is receiving it. And so when we can act, because otherwise there's no partnership, there's no dialogue, there's no communication going on. And so it's a really key task for, say, a dominant leader, because people will keep on retracting and keep on pulling back and then blaming the other person for not actually delivering, whereas it actually is coming back to the leadership style.
I love that. And in one of our courses, we talk about that for the dominant leader, where it's about, instead of being forceful, to be resourceful. So looking at how can we resource ourselves, and one of those tips would say, be asking for help. Instead of being dominant and forceful, how can I ask for help? So you're reversing that. You're going from the default into the design. So because you're recognizing that you're actually anxious, I'm quite anxious in this moment and I need help. I can't do it all and I'm feeling overwhelmed. But if I pause myself, then I can ask for help. So I am in charge, then I'm taking charge of the conflict that's happening within myself. Because that's what it comes down to, isn't it? The conflict resolution. It's that resolving the conflict that's happening within myself and taking charge of myself and how I show up in that moment.
And just to add to that, Caroline, how much is the volume of that emotional charge out of 10? And so as a leader, you could kind of gauge, if it's at 10, there's a possibility that you aren't actually being resourceful and you're taking a lot of things on. And that's what we have talked about before in our course, is around that piece, is how to become resourceful in order to bring that charge down. Because we're just bringing down that charge to say, we don't have to do everything independently. We do have a team and we can be resourceful, and that creates the engagement, that creates the connection and the collaboration. And so as a leader, we're actually bringing more skills into the mix. Which then creates a more flourishing, environment.
I love that, Kim, because it's like, again, even just with action, you're bringing out people, you're bringing people out of themselves to help you, and then they are feeling that they are getting something from that. And also I'd love to say about the avoidant leader. So for me, I used to be afraid of conflict. That was one of my major issues, actually, and it's just the fear of conflict was such a trigger for me. Whenever I would see anyone raising their voice or they would get angry, I would have a charge around that. Where now I really feel that one of the major aspects for me in my professional development has actually been able to be okay with conflict and actually see conflict as actually the spice, and how we can, that friction between people sometimes is what the fire is in the innovation, that having those heated discussions means that people are invested and that they really want to find a solution, but we can work together on that. And sometimes the rubbing together of different personalities can really create an amazing passion for what we're working on, and we can ignite each other through that. So not to for the avoidant leader to step in and to find that voice, to be able to say, yes, this is what I'm feeling, and then allow the other person to come forward with their voice too, and then to have that dialogue for negotiation. That's a really powerful piece when it comes to creating change and innovation.
I agree. And Caroline, what I would love, for someone to actually recognize that, because being a strong, dominant leader in the past, or being resilient and having those skill sets, if someone was to actually approach me and say, Kim, I'm noticing you're a little bit stressed. Would you like a little bit of help? It actually diffuses a lot of that forcefulness or that dominance, or having to have this emotional charge in place, that you're actually creating that support mechanism. And for the avoidant leaders to actually be aware that it's actually not personal to them. So I think that's a really big piece, Caroline, is it's not personal to you how I'm sometimes showing up. However, it's my responsibility about how I do show up. And so how can I bring that emotional charge down so I'm making decisions in a very responsive way. I'm making decisions because I am in charge of people as a leader. I'm making decisions that support the team and creates collaboration and engagement and, people wanting to turn up to work.
And that's a change, from the old way to the new way, where you want people to be excited about coming into work. You want them to be engaged and feel that they have a voice, and also are developed in their personality and seen and heard. And then we have that flexibility in ourselves that we can flex. I think what I'm hearing both of us say there is that compassion is a secret to the success, to bridge that gap to success, because the understanding of each style, the understanding of other people is huge in creating that mutual respect for each other, what each other can offer, and then to be able to resource that's when we can build, we start to grow together. And it does diffuse the conflict, because it is just like a pressure cooker of nobody being heard, nobody's needs being met, and nobody speaking about it or feeling oppressed or shut down. That's what that tension is in the workplace. But when we can diffuse that through our communication style, through our awareness of how we're showing up, and then that compassion piece is huge.
And it is huge, Caroline, and it points to a report that I looked at today, which Gallup had produced. And the heading was around the Japanese economy, Japan's economy, and how they're reinventing the workplace, because the disengagement over in Japan, they've recorded by talking to CEOs that the disengagement, is like 93%. So there's only 7% of people who are actually engaged in the workforce. So this is a huge number. And globally, they're talking 21% of people being engaged. So there's this hidden costs. And I want to also say hidden voices, people marginalizing their voices or not speaking up and responding. So how can we be more compassionate towards ourselves? And the costs, Caroline, are costing the corporates. And I read this figure of $524 billion annually.
Wow.
And so the effect of that is actually impacting people's well-being. The connection, the collaboration, the smiles, the joy, the laughter, the chats at the coffee place, at the coffee machine, and
have a different conversation. But oh my God, we had a great team meeting this morning. And everybody was, actually sharing who they were and celebrating their uniqueness. And we were really, so I mean, we can have a happy story at the end of it.